400 years before the first flight, he had already designed the sky. Leonardo da Vinci, the artist, the inventor, the visionary. He didn't just imagine the future, he lived in it. How could someone from the 15th century envision the helicopter, the submarine, even the artificial heart? Was he a genius, or did he see something no one else could? This is the ultimate journey into the most advanced mind in history. The story of a man who lived centuries ahead of his time. And it all began with a notebook and an obsession. October of 1517. A 65-year-old man with long hair and a silver beard walks slowly through the gardens of the Château du Clos Lucé in the Loire Valley, France. His body is frail, his right hand nearly useless after a stroke. But his eyes remain as sharp as a hawk's. Inside one of the castle rooms rests a worn leather notebook. Inside are seemingly chaotic scribbles, a suspension bridge, a primitive helicopter, a human heart dissected with surgical precision. Amid drawings of storms and hydraulic calculations, there's a nearly invisible note written in mirrored script. Rivers follow the laws of proportion. This man, exiled from his native Italy, is spending his final days as advisor to the French king, Francis I. He is no longer the young prodigy of Florence, nor the genius once summoned by dukes and popes. Yet even in this twilight, his mind remains restless, dreaming of flying machines, ideal cities, and anatomical studies that would only be understood centuries later. His name, Leonardo da Vinci. What makes Leonardo such a singular figure in history is not merely the breadth of his interests: painting, engineering, anatomy, architecture, botany, sculpture, mathematics, but how all of it connected in a single vision. To him, the world wasn't a sum of isolated parts, but an organic system of interactions. A bird in flight obeyed the same laws that governed the currents of a river. The workings of the heart mirrored the mechanisms of a hydraulic pump. And a great painting, above all, had to reveal the science of observation. Today, his notebooks are scattered across museums and private collections, some still not fully deciphered. What they reveal is more than an artist. Leonardo was a visionary whose mind seemed to inhabit a time that had not yet come. Centuries before the Industrial Revolution, he sketched parachutes, war tanks, water turbines, and ventilation systems that would prefigure modern skyscrapers. In his drawings, we see ideas that would only become technically feasible 4, 5, sometimes 600 years later. But how did the illegitimate son of a Tuscan notary, born in a rural village without access to formal universities or classical education, become the archetype of the Renaissance genius? How did a self-taught man without Latin, Greek, or advanced mathematics transform our understanding of art, science, and human knowledge itself? And perhaps the most haunting question: why, despite his brilliance, was so much of his work ignored for centuries, forgotten in notebooks, locked in trunks, nearly condemned to the silence of history? Leonardo died on the 2nd of May, 1519, in the arms of the King of France, according to some accounts. His final years were filled with reflection and invention, but also intellectual solitude. Many of his boldest projects were never built. His anatomical studies, the most advanced of his time, remained unpublished until the 19th century, and his flying machines never left the page. Still, his influence runs through the centuries like an underground river that, from time to time, bursts to the surface. In modern engineering, in medicine, in robotics, in digital art, and even in space exploration. Every time a drone flies over a city, or a digital artist fuses science and beauty in a new medium, Leonardo's spirit breathes once more. But to understand how such a mind was formed and why it broke with the conventions of its time, we must go back to the beginning. To Vinci, a village surrounded by hills and vineyards, where a curious boy spent hours watching birds in flight, rivers flowing, and shadows shifting at dusk. There, before fame, before Milan and Florence, before the Last Supper and the Mona Lisa, the spark was born that would one day become the mind that saw the future. How did a boy born out of wedlock, with no right to inheritance or formal education, shape his own path to the workshops of Europe's most powerful courts? What cultural, familial, and spiritual forces shaped his childhood? And what did he already see as a child that others could not? To find out, we must return to the year 1452, to the rural landscapes of Tuscany, where the sound of church bells and the waters of the Arno River, blended with the hammering in artisan workshops. It was there, in a small stone house, that one of history's greatest enigmas was born, Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was born on the 15th of April, 1452, in Anciano, a small village near the town of Vinci in the Tuscan region. He was the illegitimate son of Piero da Vinci, a respected notary, and Caterina, a peasant woman of uncertain origin, perhaps a servant, perhaps of Arab descent, or even a freed slave. Leonardo grew up on the margins of his era's social conventions. He would not inherit his father's family name like a noble, nor have direct access to the formal education granted to legitimate sons. But this social ambiguity gave him something rare: freedom. Freedom not to fit in. Freedom to observe the world on his own terms. Unlike most upper-class boys in Florence, who were immersed early in grammar, rhetoric, and scholastic logic, Leonardo was an instinctive autodidact. He didn't know Latin in his youth, the language of scholars, nor did he receive a classical education. But he possessed something far rarer: an insatiable curiosity and an eye trained for detail. As a child, he would spend hours drawing animals, plants, water currents, and making notes that went far beyond aesthetics. "The woodpecker's tongue wraps around its brain," he would write decades later. This obsession with nature was more than escapism or a hobby. It was the first sign of a scientific approach to reality. To Leonardo, nature was the true teacher, not books, not dogmas. And that reverence for the natural world would later put him on a collision course with the certainties of his time. Around the age of 14, his father, recognizing the boy's extraordinary talent for drawing, sent him to Florence, then one of the most vibrant cultural hubs in Europe. There, Leonardo became an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, a master not only of painting, but of sculpture, engineering, and goldsmithing. Verrocchio's studio was a creative powerhouse where names like Botticelli, Perugino, and Lorenzo di Credi would also pass through. In this chaotic, fertile environment, Leonardo found the perfect space to thrive. He learned the techniques of tempera and oil painting, mastered anatomy through animal dissections, studied gears and mechanisms, and began to develop his unique ability to portray movement with astonishing realism. But more than techniques, he absorbed a philosophy that art and science were not opposites, but reflections of one another. One of the first glimpses of his rising genius came when Verrocchio asked him to paint an angel in a larger work, The Baptism of Christ. Leonardo, still a young apprentice, painted the angel with such delicacy and realism that, according to Vasari, Verrocchio never painted again. Myth or not, The episode marked Leonardo's first step toward artistic independence. Still, even as he painted, his mind wandered elsewhere. Fascinated by bird mechanics, he began sketching flying machines based on avian flight. And in private notebooks, which he would write throughout his life in mirrored handwriting, perhaps for privacy, perhaps out of habit, he recorded everything, from ideas to improve river canals to blueprints for weapons of war. But what truly set Leonardo apart, even in these formative years, was his refusal to accept disciplinary boundaries. While other artists sought to refine their style, Leonardo wanted to know why the sky is blue. While engineers built bridges, he wanted to understand how forces distributed across an arch. And while doctors followed Galen's treatises, Leonardo opened corpses in secret to discover how muscles and organs actually worked. By his early 20s, he had begun to build a reputation in Florence, but he had not yet achieved full recognition. Many saw him as eccentric. A talented artist, yes, but scattered, unstable, and unproductive. His projects leaned toward the wildly ambitious and were rarely completed. What his contemporaries didn't see was that Leonardo was not after the product, but the process. Not the final painting, but the profound understanding of what it represented. During this time, one question began to haunt him. How can beauty and truth be united? How can a single line capture both aesthetics and the mechanics of the world? This obsession would later lead him to create works like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but also to draft river maps for Cesare Borgia, design ideal cities to contain epidemics, and write anatomical treatises that surpassed everything previously known. And it was this very pursuit that led him to leave Florence. The city was no longer enough. His ambitions required a new scale, a new court, new patrons, new challenges. It was then, at the end of the 1480s, that Leonardo moved to Milan, offering his services not as a painter, but as a military engineer. A bold decision, but a revealing one. He knew his true ambition was not merely to paint portraits. It was to reinvent the world. And it is in Milan that Leonardo will face his first great rupture, the turning point that will define the course of his life and unveil the full power of his revolutionary mind. Milan, 1482. The city breathes power, ambition, and conflict. Ruled by Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro, the Milanese court is a hub of political intrigue and also a crucible of artistic and technological innovation. Unlike Florence, which offers a bohemian refuge for artists, Milan is a practical, militarized metropolis where engineers are valued as much as sculptors. For Leonardo, it is the ideal ground to test his vision. But he doesn't arrive with a portfolio of paintings. Instead, he brings a letter of introduction that reads more like the resume of a military engineer. In it, he promises to build light yet resistant bridges, develop siege weapons, defensive canals, catapults, and even armored vehicles that can advance through enemy lines. Only at the end, almost as an afterthought, does he mention that he can also paint. This letter is more than marketing. It reveals something essential about his mindset. Leonardo saw no distinction between art and engineering, between aesthetics and function. To him, the world was a network of interconnected systems, hydraulic, mechanical, anatomical, celestial, and knowledge in one field was a key to unlock others. Over nearly 2 decades in Milan, Leonardo will have the freedom and resources to explore that vision. He works on urban planning, fortifications, mechanical stage shows, and of course, works of art. But it is through 2 specific projects that his genius reaches a pivotal moment. the equestrian statue of Francesco Sforza, and the Last Supper mural. The statue, commissioned by Ludovico to honor his father, was to be the largest equestrian sculpture in the world. Leonardo plunged into the project with obsession. He studied horse anatomy with near-scientific precision. He created molds and scale models, experimented with metallic alloys. But war with France brought everything to a halt. The bronze intended for the statue was melted down to make cannons. The sculpture was never completed. The massive clay mold, left outdoors, was destroyed by French archers in 1499. A failure? Perhaps. But for Leonardo, the process had been a laboratory of advanced engineering. Its logic would nourish him for years. The Last Supper, painted between 1495 and 1498 in the dining hall of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, marks a quiet revolution in Western art. Leonardo did not execute it as a traditional fresco, but with an experimental technique, dry pigments on dry plaster, which led to its rapid deterioration. Yet the aesthetic and narrative impact of the work transcended any technical flaw. In this biblical scene, Leonardo introduced a groundbreaking visual language. The apostles are not frozen in solemnity, but captured in the precise moment when Christ announces he will be betrayed. Emotions erupt through gestures, glances, and meticulously studied dramatic tension. The architectural space is rendered with such precise perspective that it envelops the viewer, and Christ at the center forms a perfect triangle, a symbol of divine stability amid human chaos. But few recognize the degree of science behind the art. Leonardo calculated light, shadow, geometry, and human behavior with the precision of an anatomist and the sensitivity of a poet. The Last Supper was not merely a religious image. It was a visual manifesto of the union between science and spirituality. During this time, Leonardo also devotes himself intensely to the study of the human body. Through a series of dissections, illegal and secret, he records the heart, brain, muscles, and nerves with a precision that would not be matched until the 19th century. His anatomical notebooks, ignored for centuries, reveal three-dimensional diagrams, studies of embryos, and insights into blood circulation that predated William Harvey's discoveries by more than 100 years. And he didn't stop there. Leonardo began sketching flying machines based on the wings of bats. He proposed portable bridges, diving suits, automatic mechanisms powered by weights and gears. Many were never built, but all show the same obsession: to understand the fundamental principle of movement. But this explosion of creativity came at a cost. In 1499, war reached Milan. Ludovico Sforza was deposed, and Leonardo once again found himself on the run, with notebooks under his arm and ideas in a frenzy. He would leave behind the city that had allowed him to dare, but take with him an irreversible awareness. His mind could no longer be contained by patrons or singular projects. It belonged to a time that had not yet come. At this point, Leonardo enters a new phase, more nomadic, more reflective, but also more free. He is no longer just seeking to please patrons. He is seeking to unravel the very logic of the universe. And it is precisely that impulse that will lead him, in the years to come, to the height of his influence, but also to the harshest trials of his journey. Leonardo is in motion. After the fall of Ludovico Sforza in 1499, he leaves Milan with no clear destination. He passes through Mantua, then Venice, and finally returns to Florence in 1500. The city has changed, and so has he. Now nearly 50 years old, He carries the experience of a war engineer, a clandestine anatomist, a revered artist, but also one often misunderstood. The years in Milan had shaped him, but not defined him. In Florence, a new chapter awaits, and with it, the greatest challenge of his life: to paint a face that would defy time. Mona Lisa began taking shape around 1503. Her real name was Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a Florentine merchant. But what Leonardo created went far beyond a bourgeois portrait. He employed a revolutionary technique, sfumato, a smooth transition between light and shadow that gave the image an ethereal, almost living quality. The enigmatic smile, the absence of eyebrows, the landscape in the background blending into the figure. Everything was designed to disorient perception and suggest that there was more there than the eye could see. Leonardo never delivered the painting. He carried it with him for years, adjusting it obsessively, as if trying to trap a secret in the woman's gaze. Some say the Mona Lisa's face is a coded self-portrait. Others claim it represents an unattainable ideal of beauty and serenity. Perhaps it is all of that, or none of it. What we do know is that in that painting, Leonardo tried to capture not just appearance, but the mystery of consciousness. Yet while his art reached new heights of sophistication, his relationship with the world grew more strained. He briefly worked as an engineer for Cesare Borgia, one of the most feared men in Italy, son of Pope Alexander VI. He traveled through war-torn cities, drew topographic maps with near-modern accuracy, and proposed defense and supply systems. His scientific eye now served military strategy. It was the price of survival and freedom. Even so, Leonardo never abandoned research. Back in Florence, he competed with Michelangelo in public commissions. Both were hired to paint epic murals in the Palazzo Vecchio. Michelangelo chose a scene of brutal battle. Leonardo, a moment of psychological tension. Neither mural was completed. The two geniuses, so different in temperament and technique, left behind sketches that would become legend. But the confrontation revealed something deeper. Leonardo no longer belonged to that generation. While others chased visual impact, he sought the invisible essence of the world. And that essence, he believed, was found in the human body. In the following years, he intensified his anatomical studies. He dissected corpses in hospitals in Florence, Milan, and Rome. He drew the circulatory system, internal organs, the skeletal structure. In one of his notebooks, he wrote, "I will describe the human body as a great machine." It was the first step toward modern medicine, but it was also dangerous. The church watched him with suspicion. The physicians of the time saw him as an outsider. And then, silence. Around 1510, Leonardo began to withdraw from public life. His works were left unfinished, his projects shelved. Rome, under Pope Leo X, received him coldly. Michelangelo and Raphael now ruled the artistic stage. Leonardo, an older man by then, felt displaced. His mind still sharp, but his body weakened, his ambitions too grand for a fragmented Italy. The final ordeal came in the form of disillusionment. The notebooks piled up. The inventions remained on paper. The world was not ready. Perhaps he knew it. In one note he wrote bitterly, "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not achieve what it should have." But was it truly failure? In that twilight moment, a final opportunity arose. In 1516, the King of France, Francis I, a young monarch captivated by Renaissance culture, invited Leonardo to live in France as first painter, engineer, and architect to the king. At 64 years old, Leonardo crossed the Alps one last time. He carried few possessions, but among them 3 paintings, one of them the Mona Lisa. He settled in the Château du Clos Lucé in Amboise. There his life took on a contemplative rhythm. He received visits from nobles, discussed philosophy with the king, reviewed his notebooks. His body, weakened by a stroke, limited his movement, but his mind continued to create. In his final drawings appear visions of sustainable cities, mobile bridges, and even a mechanical man, a distant precursor to the modern robot. On the 2nd of May, 1519, Leonardo died. He was 67 years old. According to legend, he passed in the arms of Francis I, a poetic, if not entirely historical image. In his will, he left his notebooks, manuscripts, and drawings to his most loyal disciple, Francesco Melzi. Many of these documents would be scattered, lost, and only rediscovered centuries later. In the end, Leonardo faced the greatest paradox of all. He was a man of ideas whose era lacked the means to realize them. A visionary who saw the future, but lived in a time that could barely comprehend the present. Centuries have passed since Leonardo da Vinci closed his eyes for the last time inside a French chateau, and yet his presence has never truly vanished. Like an underground river, his thinking continued to flow, escaping the dusty drawers where his notebooks lay forgotten for generations, until it emerged with power in much later times, perhaps more capable of grasping the magnitude of his mind. For a long time, Leonardo was known primarily as the painter of the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. His brilliance as an artist overshadowed, or rather delayed, the recognition of his other identities. Engineering, anatomy, mathematics, hydraulics, optics, all remained in the background until the 19th century, when scholars began to decipher the manuscripts scattered across Europe. What they uncovered was astonishing. Leonardo had anticipated aerodynamic principles that would only be formally studied with the Wright brothers. He created geographical maps with near-modern accuracy. His anatomical drawings are still admired in medical schools today. He sketched concepts of lenses and mirrors that touched the very foundations of optics. He envisioned automatic machines, urban mobility designs, sewage and ventilation systems for cities, ideas that prefigured today's principles of sustainability. In each of these fields, Leonardo did not merely dabble, he laid the groundwork. But perhaps his greatest legacy is not found in the inventions that could have been, but in the attitude he held toward knowledge itself. In an era ruled by the authority of classical texts, he dared to declare, "Experience is the only true teacher." Leonardo rejected dogmatic knowledge. He championed an empirical, experimental science, one that observed nature with open, unconditioned eyes, a principle that would lie at the very heart of the modern scientific method. This mindset did not belong solely to the Renaissance. It resurfaces, with force, in humanity's greatest leaps. In Newton's scientific revolution, in the invention of machines during the Industrial Age, in space exploration, in artificial intelligence. Every time humankind crosses the threshold between art and science, between imagination and precision, Leonardo's spirit is there, like an invisible mentor. Today, his legacy inspires engineers, doctors, architects, digital artists, filmmakers, and programmers. His notebooks are studied by tech companies. His drawings are displayed alongside genetic codes. His principles applied in robotics and biomechanics. In 2019, on the 500th anniversary of his death, the world honored him not only as an artistic genius, but as one of the first systemic visionaries in history. Someone capable of seeing the world as a vast, interconnected whole. exactly as we strive to do today amid environmental, technological, and social crises. But there is something more, something subtler, more intimate. When we look into the eyes of the Mona Lisa, or at the silent embryo sketches Leonardo traced in solitude, or at his flying machines that never took off, we are reminded that human knowledge is not linear. It pulses, it fades, it hides, and returns. Leonardo was not an invincible hero. He was a man who made mistakes, who was ignored, who never saw his work fully recognized in his lifetime. And yet, he persisted. He observed, he studied, he wrote, he dreamed. Perhaps this is his greatest legacy, the demonstration that curiosity can be a revolutionary force, that a restless mind, even in the face of indifference or misunderstanding, can redraw the boundaries of what is possible. Today, every time we use a bionic prosthetic, fly drones over cities, map the human brain, or attempt to understand the complexity of Earth's climate, we are in dialogue with him, with the man who believed that everything is connected, and that the key to the future is always hidden in the rigorous observation of the present. Leonardo left us more than paintings and machines. He left us a way of seeing, and above all, a question that still echoes through time. What if we dared to think beyond our own era?